Once again, answers to our questions are not forthcoming if we accept the grand chess match as a straightforward struggle on a two-dimensional chessboard. However, when we posit a 3D alternative, namely, the idea that there are hidden powers employing financial, economic, and military resources not visible from the 2D perspective, a light bulb switches on. It all suddenly makes sense. Who are these 3D players? They are people in positions of power and influence whose allegiance lies neither with Team West nor Team East. They are not Team America, or Team China, or Team Russia. They do not identify with Team NATO, or Team BRICS, or any other nation state or military alliance or regional grouping. Instead, their allegiance is to their fellow international oligarchs. These oligarchs, after all, are of a like mindset. Their aim is not to control this or that square of the chessboard, but to control the minds of the masses. And, by bamboozling the public with patriotic propaganda and employing other divide and conquer tactics, they hope to consolidate their position of ultimate power. Lest the role of these deep state actors in manipulating the 3D chessboard be dismissed as conspiracy theory, it is worth noting that the existence of this clique is not a matter of speculation. In fact, over the decades various insiders and confidants have openly written about being a member of its ranks. In 1928, Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's American nephew and the man credited by the New York Times as the father of public relations, 54, wrote not only of the existence of this group but also of its hidden influence over society. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. 55. 4 decades later, Carroll Quigley, a renowned professor of history whom Bill Clinton regarded as a mentor during his undergrad days at Georgetown University, 56, fleshed out Bernays' claim. In his 1966 opus, Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, Quigley confirmed that such an invisible government does indeed exist. He further asserted that this network, as Quigley called the coterie of power brokers, had granted him access to its secret archives, where he found evidence confirming some of the conspiratorial claims of right-wing partisans. There does exist, and has existed for a generation, an international Anglophile network which operates, to some extent, in the way the radical right believes the communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the Round Table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the communists, or any other group, and frequently does so. I know of the operation of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years, in the early 1960s, to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims and have, for much of my life, been close to it and to many of its instruments. I have objected, both in the past and recently, to a few of its policies. But in general my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. 57. Winding the clock forward another 4 decades, we find a third insider's corroboration, this one from David Rothkopf, a Clinton administration official who served as a managing director of Henry Kissinger's advisory firm, Kissinger Associates, after leaving government service. In his 2008 book, Superclass, The Global Power Elite and the World They Are Making, Rothkopf revealed the existence of an elite group of 6,000 people capable of implementing financial and political plans across international boundaries. A global elite has emerged over the past several decades that has vastly more power than any other group on the planet. Each of the members of this superclass has the ability to influence the lives of millions of people in multiple countries worldwide. Each actively exercises this power, and they often amplify it through the development of relationships with others in this class. 58. Mind you, these are just a few of the many on the record statements that these deep state insiders and 3D chess players are willing to put on paper or reveal in interviews. We can only wonder what they discuss at Trilateral Commission, Bohemian Grove, or Bilderberg gatherings or at any of their other globalist conclaves. Some rare snippets of their private conversations have been leaked from behind closed doors, one of which is, surprise, surprise, a chess analogy. In 1976, investigative journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein reported that Kissinger had referred pointedly to U.S. military personnel as dumb, stupid animals to be used as pawns for foreign policy. 59. Virtually all knowledgeable commentators now concede that the deep state exists. And, as Rothkarpf and Bernays and Quigley have correctly pointed out, these deep state players are manipulating the grand chessboard largely out of the general public's sight. This leads us to the most important question of all. Now that we are aware of the 3D chess game, how do we reject our assigned role of pawn and stop playing the deep state game altogether? Revolt of the Pawns. In January 2009, Zbigniew Brzezinski, self-proclaimed Grandmaster of the Global Chessboard, penned a journal article in which he outlined a significant new socio-political phenomenon, the global political awakening. Observing the worldwide growth in political awareness and activism around issues such as climate, environment, starvation, health and social inequality, he wrote, "These issues are becoming more contentious because they have come to the fore in the context of what I have described in my writings as the global political awakening, itself a truly transformative event on the global scene. For the first time in human history, almost all of humanity is politically activated, politically conscious and politically interactive. There are only a few pockets of humanity left in the remotest corners of the world that are not politically alert and engaged with the political turmoil and stirrings that are so widespread today around the world. The resulting global political activism is generating a surge in the quest for personal dignity, cultural respect and economic opportunity in a world painfully scarred by memories of centuries-long alien colonial or imperial domination. 60. In fact, this global political awakening became something of a fixation of Brzezinski's around this time. He mentioned it in a series of op-eds 61 and interviews 62 and in secret, off-the-record speeches 63 he delivered in 2008 and 2009. It's not difficult to understand why such a giant revolution in political consciousness would occupy the attention of Brzezinski. As this master manipulator rightly points out, for the first time in history, average people have access not only to vast sums of knowledge but to the technology that allows them to share that knowledge online with everyone in the world instantaneously and simultaneously. What's more, the technology is relatively affordable and can comfortably fit in a pocket. Such ubiquitous access to information and opinion has understandably led to a flowering of political awareness and a corresponding blossoming of political activism. See Reportage, Adventures in the New Media, elsewhere in this book. But while most of us would consider this phenomenon to be a net good, Brzezinski saw it as a problem. In a moment of candor as remarkable for its honesty as for its blood-curdling implications, he revealed what this global political awakening really represents to the Machiavellian schemers on the grand chessboard. But these major world powers, new and old, also face a novel reality. While the lethality of their military might is greater than ever, their capacity to impose control over the politically awakened masses of the world is at a historic low. To put it bluntly, in earlier times, it was easier to control 1 million people than to physically kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. 64. Here we have, in all its brazen candor, the bottom line calculation of the grandmasters of the global chessboard: is it easier to control the masses or to kill them? And, if it is easier to kill 1 million people than to control them, why not do just that? There is no doubt that Brzezinski's analysis is essentially correct. Humanity's continued existence depends on the whim of a cool calculation by the would-be world rulers. When it becomes easier to kill the pawns than to control them, the despotic kings of the 3D chessboard will choose to do precisely that. The gravity of the situation also leaves no doubt that something must be done about this predicament. And, given everything we've learned so far, it's tempting to frame our response to this threat in chessboard terms: how can we win this game? Can we pawns form our own team? Can we attack the deep state kings and queens who are attempting to control us? Can we reclaim any squares on the grand 3D chessboard? But to ask such questions is to fall into a trap. By accepting the fundamental premise of the chessboard analogy, we thereby accept the implications of that analogy. After all, if the world itself really is a chessboard, then it follows that we really are engaged in a grand game for control of that board. And, once we become engaged in such a contest, it follows that wealth and land and resources and even people themselves really are just chess pieces to be manipulated by this or that player in pursuit of geopolitical dominance. If we were to play this game of empire, however, we would not only end up adopting the twisted mentality of the Brzezinskis and Kissingers of the world, treating our fellow human beings as pawns to be controlled and sacrificed as needed, but we would also find ourselves in a no-win situation. Every strategy afforded us in the grand chess game would simply lead us back to the same spot. So, should we attempt to regain control of the chessboard by voting harder and electing better representatives into office? Upon a moment's reflection, we would conclude that this strategy is ineffective at best and delusional at worst. As we've already seen, the 2D chessboard and the surface political institutions that are visible to the public are, in fact, largely powerless. The elected politicians are controlled by the deep state through bribery, blackmail, extortion and, if need be, assassination. Voting between deep state puppets hardly offers a real solution to our problem. Worse, our participation in the phony, rigged political system would only signal our support for the status quo and its outcomes. Should we engage in violent revolution, then take up arms against the deep state and try to win back the chessboard by force? That path, too, would lead to certain disaster. As Brzezinski correctly observed, given the advances in the technology of warfare, it is now infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. We know the ruling psychopaths would not hesitate to unleash the apocalypse if they ever felt genuinely threatened by a mass uprising. Given that they are sitting on the nuclear stockpiles and the bioweapons labs and the increasingly automated armed forces, and given that they have spent decades building up the machinery of technological tyranny under the Homeland Security pretense, is there any doubt who would win such a contest? Might we form alliances with so-called resistance bloc countries and use their muscle to overpower the 3D deep state grandmasters of the West? Couldn't we ally ourselves with, say, the Chinese and the Russians to take back control of the board? Alas, that strategy, too, is doomed to fail. It starts from the false premise that the Chinese and Russians and the other perceived enemies of the West represent a true threat to the power structure. But Russia and China, despite being supposed rivals of the NATO bloc, continue to signal their full-throated support of the technocratic globalist agenda, from their commitment to the supremacy of the United Nations to their adherence to the Sustainable Development Goals to their assent to the creation of an international biosecurity grid. 65. What's worse, even if this strategy were successful, if the governments of China and Russia and other countries could somehow defeat the US and its NATO allies on the global chessboard, we would still be mere pawns on the board, beholden to other wannabe kings and queens. Whether those would-be rulers are based in China or Russia or America or Madagascar makes no difference. Our situation would stay the same. No, none of these strategies suffice. The only winning move in this game of empire is to reject the game entirely. So, let us reject it. Starting now. Our planet is not a chessboard. It does not consist of squares to be divvied up and occupied by competing teams. It is not populated by chess pieces to be manipulated by this or that player in service of some grand geopolitical agenda. Instead, it is a world filled with sovereign human beings, each of us born with the natural right to make our own individual choices about how we live our lives. It is a world in which each of us is free to transact and interact with others as we see fit. Free to speak our mind. Free to move from place to place and free to pursue our own interests and free to make our own decisions about our bodies and our health and our food and our medicine. In short, free from all outside compulsion or control. It is a world in which we and our fellow human beings are recognized as autonomous individuals deserving of dignity, not chess pieces to be manipulated by others. Life is not a zero-sum, win-lose competition for a slice of a fixed pie. No. Life is a win-win quest for cooperation and exploration and adventure on a beautiful, flourishing, abundant, ever-expanding pie. Our world does not require a top-down order imposed by elite members of an exclusive, superclass, who, by virtue of some magical political ritual, are able to impose their will on the common man without his consent. On the contrary, a thriving society requires the spontaneous order that develops when everyone is free to form voluntary relationships based on mutual consent. We are not pawns on a chessboard to be exploited in a battle for political dominance, and we do not need to win any grand chess game in order to take control of our own lives. Instead, we are simply human beings who are finding ways to live side by side with other human beings and a multitude of non-human beings on a fertile, living planet. It is not until we completely reject the mindset of the Brzezinskis and the Kissingers and the other self-styled grandmasters of the so-called grand chessboard that we can truly begin to take back our rightful power. We don't need to take over the chessboard. We don't even need to flip it over. Instead, we need to simply walk away from the game entirely. After all, the would-be grandmasters can't play chess with our lives if we refuse to be their pawns. The royal game of global geopolitical chess, it turns out, is a strange game. The only winning move is not to play. Note: